Welcome to the 25th video of the Just In Case series, sponsored by Quality and Equality consultancy firm in Oxford. We call it Just In Case. It's just in case you want to be reminded about something, just in case you want to refresh your memory, and just in case you want to pick up something new. Today we are joined by Dr. Anne Litwin, a wonderful friend and a brilliant thought leader in the field of OD. She already appeared in video number 10 with Barbara Bunker talking about gender equality. And Dr. Litwin is an author of many wonderful books. Her recent books called New Rules for Women, Revolutionizing the Way That Women Work Together, and is the co-author of a book called Managing the Age of Change, along with numerous articles on organization development along the subject of gender differences and women's leadership. We particularly asked Anne to talk about what are some of the rules for women to work together. So when we talk about gender equality, it's not just about between women and men, but also between women. So Anne is shared with us through her coaching experience and her research experience about how women relate to each other, connect with each other. These concepts often are very subtle and invisible, but they are nonetheless real gender dynamics that influence women's workplace relationship. She also covers concepts which she has encountered through 4 decades of working with women. For example, the imposter syndrome and being the only syndrome, which she offers further insights into how organizations can create a truly collaborative and shared workplace. So lots of food for thought. Thank you, Anne, for offering your time to share these wonderful wisdom with us and the viewer. So I hope viewer will find it very stimulating. So Anne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mian. I want to thank Mian Chung Judge for this opportunity to talk with you today as OD professionals about barriers and opportunities for women in organizations. Mian knows that I have a great passion for helping women be successful, and that I have a great passion for OD and the role that I think OD can play in creating more inclusive organizations. So by way of review, I want to acknowledge that we work at all levels of system as OD professionals. And today, in my material that I'm going to present to you, I'm going to reference the intrapersonal, the interpersonal, group, and system levels in the material that I'm going to share. Specifically today, I'm going to talk about 3 topics. I'm going to share my own research on women in organizations, gender dynamics in organizations. I'm going to share other research, very current research on gender dynamics in organizations. And I'm going to talk about the role that I think OD can play in creating more inclusive cultures where women can be successful. And I want to talk about some potential changes around gender dynamics, positive ones that I think could come out of these pandemic that we're all living through. So I will reference those things today. So I'm going to share with you some of my research now. And the research is going to address three of the levels of system that we just reviewed. And I'm going to share 2 findings specifically from the research. There are, of course, more than 2 findings from my research, but you can read about the others in my book, New Rules for Women, if you're interested. The 2 I'm going to share, I think, are particularly significant for our topic today. So let me give you a little background. I did this research because I've been a consultant and an executive coach for more than 30 years. And over the years, I just heard too many painful stories from women who I work with about feeling unsupported by other women at work. And it bothered me. Of course, I heard positive stories too. Women can be very supportive. And I don't know where I would be in my life without the support of other women. But there were just too many of these painful stories of feeling unsupported by other women at work. And I felt that I wanted to do something to try to shift that dynamic. And I really had no idea where to begin, but but then this experience happened. So one day, for a routine coaching session, a woman came into my office complaining bitterly about an experience that she had just had with a woman customer. She was very hurt and she was feeling personally betrayed. And what she said was, I had a woman customer who has worked with me for many years. And I just found out that she has changed vendors and she's no longer working with either me or with my company. And the worst part of it is, she said, I had to find out about this from someone else. And then she says, and you have to get the whole kind of gestalt of this. She says, if you could see me, you could see I'm going, who does she think she is? I thought she was my friend. But this is the kicker. She says to me, I would have expected this from a man, but not from a woman. And I thought, really? This is business. It's just business, right? She's a customer. But then I realized, no, what's really interesting here is this expectation of personal loyalty from women, but not from men. And I realized that actually this was familiar. I had heard versions of this, not in these exact words, but I had heard versions of this over the years of women expressing disappointment in the behavior of other women, while at the same time expecting that same behavior from men. And I thought, now this is interesting. If I could crack the code on this a little bit in terms of where is this coming from? And what has the workplace context got to do with it? If I could figure this out, if I might be able to find something useful that would help women shift this dynamic. And I think I did in my research. I did find some useful things. So I'm going to share with you now 2 findings that I think are particularly significant here. One of them, this first one that I'm calling friendship rules, emerged as really a theme, like a macro theme in the research. It crosses over lots of other findings, but I'm going to share it with you today as sort of foundational in terms of some points I want to make. So this emerged as a theme, something called friendship rules. And what I mean by that is that there are relational expectations that we begin to develop very young in life, and that we refine as we mature. And then by the time I think we're adults, we still have them. But while we're very conscious of them when we're younger, by the time we get to be adults, we're really no longer conscious of them. They're still there, I think, that we have them. But I think they become embedded in us as a set of filters through which we're interpreting the behavior of other women. But we don't realize that we're doing that. And the other thing that's important about it is that I'm going to show you some very common ones in a moment. But you will notice when I show them this list to you that they are very relational. They're very flat structured. And I think that one of the things that's happening is we're carrying these very flat structured relational friendship rules into the hierarchical masculine workplace. Now, most workplaces the norms and cultures are based upon men's friendship rules because they were there first and they created these cultures. And I think that we are carrying these flat structured expectations into the hierarchical workplace where we are crashing into them as women in terms of our expectations of each other. So we have to be able to behave like this when we're in organizations if we want to be successful. And we can do that very well. We can be the bosses of other people. We can have power. We can be senior level leaders. But I think that when we behave this way, which we can do, which we need to do, we are crashing into the flat structured relational expectations about how women are supposed to behave when we're interacting with the other women. So I think this is setting us up this is a systemic way that we're being set up to be disappointed by other women and perhaps to even feel betrayed. And that problem is they're unconscious, right? So that we have to become conscious of them so that we can shift this dynamic. But let me show you now a little bit about, I'm going to show you a sample of some common friendship expectations or friendship rules in the workplace. Now, these, of course, there are cultural differences. And in my research, I included women in my study, not only in the US, but in Spain, in Mexico, in India, and in China. And I found cultural differences. I talk about them in the book, but I also found some common threads that run across cultures in terms of women's expectations. So let me just make this point before I share the list with you. There are cultural differences, and we don't all have the same expectations, the same friendship rules. But there are some very common ones I'm going to share with you now. So take a look at this list with me, and let's notice what's here. The first one is showing unswerving loyalty, trustworthiness, ability to keep confidences, be a good listener, share gossip and air problems, self-disclose, practice equality and acceptance while seldom disapproving. And the last one, don't discuss your friendship rules. Now, when I am sharing this list with a live audience, it's about halfway through that I start to hear a rumble, kind of a chuckle that runs through the room, right? As people start to notice that there's some conflicting friendship rules here, and that, for example, you can't share gossip and air problems in order to build a relationship with someone without breaking the confidence of someone else, right? And making yourself untrustworthy in some way. So there are some internal contradictions. But the problem here is this last one, don't discuss the friendship rules, because it's almost as if it's a taboo. Now, this is a huge cultural difference here. There are, of course, groups where this friendship rule does not exist. For example, in the U.S., I would say that African American women, generally speaking, not true for every African American woman, generally speaking, African American women do value directness and are more direct, and it would be easy for them generally to call something out if they thought there was a misunderstanding happening. But for many of us, I think more so white Western women, but also, this is also true, I think, for the Mexican women and the Chinese women, that they feel that it's almost a taboo to talk about something that I'm calling friendship rules. So it comes out something like this. So I just had a coaching client recently come in complaining that she had worked very closely with another woman for years as peers, and that my client had just gotten promoted, and she would now be the boss of her friend, and they were personal friends outside of work as well as close colleagues. And now that she'd been promoted, her peer, her friend, had turned her back on her, had really become very distant and cold. And my client was feeling very hurt by this. So when I asked her, well, have you talked to her about this? She said, and this is what I usually often hear, right? No, I'm not going to talk to her about this. She knows what she did, and besides, I don't trust her now. Something like that, right? There are a million excuses that we can come up with for why we won't talk about our feelings being hurt or feeling betrayed in some way. And so I think that's this friendship rule operating that says we can't discuss our friendship rules. Well, of course, one of the most important interventions here in terms of being able to improve the relationships between women at work and they increase their ability to support each other is that we have to be able to talk about these what previously felt like undiscussable expectations. However, the problem is that they are unconscious. So this is one of the things as OD consultants where we can make a contribution in helping women become more aware of what their expectations are and renegotiating them, because many of these are not reasonable. We certainly are not functional in the workplace. So the OD intervention here is we have to get women to talk about it. And I find they can, even though they're unconscious. Often in presentations, I used to ask my audiences to turn to someone next to them and share your friendship rules with each other. Well, they couldn't do it. What they could do was just kind of reproduce this list that's on the screen. But then I would start to get emails the next morning from participants saying, I went home last night. I called up my best friend and I said, do we have friendship rules? And we realized, yeah, we do have friendship rules, but actually we've never talked about them and they're not the same. And we realized, oh, we need to be clear with each other about our expectations. Thank you very much. So talking about it is the intervention, and it can be done, but some good facilitation can help. Now I'd like to talk to you about the second finding from my research, competition among women. Now, when I interviewed women for my study, I asked them about competition. Now, I collected my data by asking groups of women to design and enact role plays demonstrating typical interactions between women in the workplace, and competition often came out in one or two of the role plays. So the follow-up interviews that I did then would reference what happened in the role plays, and so if competition had happened, I would ask about it, and I'd say, well, there was a role play about competition. What do you think about competition among women? And I heard over and over again, very strong theme. Oh yeah, women are competitive with each other. Oh yeah, yeah. And when I asked them then, well, why do you think that is? They would say, well, or some version of this, well, it's just the way women are. So what I want to say is that's a group level response, right? It's just the way women are. But in fact, this dynamic is systemic. And it's not just the way women are. I have a participant who, so I think, put it very well, and I have a quote here from her that explains the systemic nature of this. You don't see men as your competition. You see women as your competition because there are limited spaces for us at the top. So you can see the system implication here. In male-dominated organizations, where there are very few women at the top, it's women who you feel you have to compete with. So one consequence of this, of course, is that the junior women then often see senior women as very competitive with each other and very unsupportive and even competitive with them. And interestingly, I just had a chance to work with a group of senior women in a large banking organization where my colleague and I were brought in to help the women get along better. The perception was that the women were not getting along, the senior women were not, and the junior women. So we did focus groups, and the junior women said what it says here, that they saw the senior women as competitive with each other, unsupportive, and competitive with them. But when we did the focus group with the senior women, what they said was, oh, we're very supportive of each other. And one by one, they proclaimed their commitment to support more junior women, and that their confidence that they were very supportive of the junior women. So when we had the senior women together then for a one-day retreat, and we shared back the findings from the focus groups that the junior women perceived them this way, they were shocked. And so it was really important for them to have an awareness of in ways in which the system was really setting them up to be perceived as competitive and to be competitive, but in ways that they didn't see, that the junior women saw. So there's a need here. The OD role here really is to help women see the systemic dynamics that are impacting them. When we shared this data, as well as other data with them about gender dynamics in society at large, in their industry, and even within their organization, they were shocked to see that actually there were systemic forces impacting them and impacting the way that the more junior women saw them, and that this is something they could do something about once they were aware. And so they really felt empowered to make some changes. So that is what I think is possible and can happen with some system awareness. So now I would like to share with you some current research. So this is research by other people. These are some things that are just coming out, just have come out recently about gender dynamics in organizations. It's part of what I think women in organizations and women and men need to be aware of, but generally are not. So I'll share what I call 7 top things. But there are more than 7. It's just that these are 7 that are sort of standing out for me right now in terms of gender dynamics in organizations. The first one is this gender pay gap. It's very persistent. I know it's not only in the US. In fact, I think it's everywhere in the world. There are some shocking UN statistics about how it's going to take like 200 years or something like that for women to catch up in terms of pay parity. But here are some current statistics in the US. White women working full-time earn 79 cents for every dollar a man makes working at the same job with the same skills. This is a statistic, 79 cents for white women. That has persisted for at least 20 years, and I think it's more like 30 years when I first heard it. It's even worse for women of color, 62 cents on the dollar for Black women, 57 cents for Native or Indigenous Americans, 54 cents for Latinas. These numbers have not changed. So this is something we need to be aware of, and we need to, as OD consultants, really push to make this more transparent, which is often not transparent if change is going to happen. Women get interrupted more than men. It's another piece of research that's come out in recent years. It was always something I thought of as kind of perhaps an urban myth, right? I know women, I would talk with other women about how we felt like we got interrupted all the time. We got interrupted more. And I always wondered if that was really true. But now some research has come out, really solid research showing that, yes, actually, this is a thing. Women do get interrupted more. And it ends up shutting us down because when we can't get our points made, let alone heard, we end up eventually stop trying to make them often. And so it silences women for this dynamic to happen. And there are ways to shift this dynamic, but we need to be aware of it, see that it is documented, and then as OD consultants can help to change this dynamic. Another one, women are evaluated negatively more frequently than men. And this was a study that was done, actually it's a huge study based on 360 feedback that is done on online formats that can then be collectively studied. And 28 companies were involved in this particular study. They found women get negative evaluations more frequently, and when they give a negative evaluation, it is more likely that it's going to include personal characteristics. In fact, 76% of the time when women get a negative evaluation, it involves personal characteristics like not smiling enough, being too abrasive, that sort of thing. And for men when they get negative performance evaluations, only 2% of the time are personal characteristics mentioned, like smiling and abrasiveness. So this is a systemic pattern, and it needs that we can shift if there's awareness about it. Next top thing in terms of current research, this is a positive one, women get evaluated higher on 17 out of 19 leadership characteristics that are measured on another 360 feedback instrument. This is a very large study. It's actually a replication of an earlier study that showed that that it was still true, that women get evaluated higher on 17 out of 19 leadership characteristics. It's a study that involved 7,280 leaders across multi-sector organizations. And this is important because of other research that we have is showing that women are not seen as leaders, not seen as leadership material. There's one study where they recently asked people to submit a drawing of a leader. I think the New York Times did this. They asked people to send in a drawing of a leader. And most of the drawings by both women and men were pictures of men. Lots of other studies showing that we don't see women as leaders or don't think women can be leaders, including, as you all probably know, we have never had a woman president in the United States. We still have a deep held belief here that women cannot be leaders. So this study is showing that women actually are evaluated higher on all these leadership characteristics. It would be important for raising awareness about women's capabilities. Another recent study, women face double bind challenges. I know this is something you probably have heard about, the likability trap. So women, when they do behave as leaders by being assertive and decisive, they are seen as not likable by both women and men. They cannot get elected, they cannot get hired, they cannot get promoted. So this is not a new concept, but I think that there is a new book by Joan Williams called Unbending Gender, in which she really deepens our understanding of this dynamic and offers more research to show the pervasiveness of this double bind for women. Next is some new research. I'm going to tell you more about it in a minute on onlys. This is when women are often or always the only woman in the room. And there's some research that's just come out, I'll share more about in a moment, about the really important negative impact on women when they are onlys. And last but not least, I wanted to share just some very current research done in the US during this pandemic when we've been all shut in and working from home, showing that 70% of working women who are working full-time from home say they are fully or mostly responsible for the housework, the childcare, the homeschooling, and consequently are more likely to lose their job. And so I think this is going to have some, it's really revealed. In some ways, there's always been not in some ways, there's always been a divide between the private and public. And to the extent to which women were actually not even supposed to talk at work about their families or acknowledge that they even had families. And I think that that veil has been ripped off with this pandemic and everyone working from home, with children crawling on our laps in the middle of business meetings. And so in any case, I think that this has some implications, possible implications for us in the future as well. It could be positive, actually. So these are all dynamics that we need as OD consultants to be able to make people aware of this by sharing this research in organizations in order to bring about change. So I wanted to share those with you. Now I'd like to tell you a little more about two intrapersonal dynamics, one of which I mentioned earlier. The first one I want to talk about, though, is the imposter phenomenon. Now, I don't know about you, if you've ever felt like you're a fraud, but I have. And in fact, this is not an uncommon experience that that some of us have. And I want to tell you a little bit more about that. It is actually an internal experience of being phony or a fraud, believing that we are not capable, not smart. Even in contradiction to the evidence, despite the evidence of high achievement, we can believe, some of us believe this. And this dynamic is important to be aware of, because part of the problem is we often think we're the only ones who are having this experience. It's not new. It's not a new term. The imposter phenomenon was coined in 1988 by Dr. Pauline Clance, but there is some new research just out that really helps understand it more and see more about what's going on. So two things I want to tell you about is that the reason this is important is that the dynamic impacts women more than men. It impacts women more frequently and more intensively than it impacts men, even though it does impact men. And in fact, I currently have a young man as a coaching client who's really suffering under the burden of this imposter phenomenon. He has great work that he is meant to do in the world, and he just is struggling to push through this imposter phenomenon. He will, and he can, but it takes a lot of effort. So we need to be aware of this. And also, imposter phenomenon syndrome hits minority groups harder than white people. And so we need to be aware of that. there are reasons for that in terms of sort of the double whammy that people of color, women of color face in terms of the messages they get about being both women and of color. So what I want to tell you about is, though, that this phenomenon, this syndrome, it's not uncommon. Not everyone has it, but it's not uncommon. So that's important to understand. We typically don't have a name. Most people don't have a name for what they're experiencing. And they don't talk about the feelings because they think it's just them. They think they're the only ones having them. They don't see other people struggling in the way that they're struggling internally with believing in themselves. And so being able to name this for people and say, this is a thing, it really exists, you're not the only one, and there are strategies for helping people overcome it, that's so incredibly liberating and empowering for people. So that's why I think it's important to be aware of the dynamic. The other dynamic that I referenced earlier that I want to talk about, where there's new research, is about being an only. This is where women are often or always the only woman in the room. So this is a survey that was conducted on 64,000 women in 279 companies, where they asked, are you frequently or always the only woman in the room? And actually 1 in 5 women said yes. Now, when you get up into the more senior levels or into technical roles, it actually becomes 40%. And so that's almost half of the women in senior and technical roles who are onlys. They are often or always the only woman in the room. And what's important about this is that it has a tremendous impact. It can have a very important impact on people. So women who are onlys report are twice as likely to be sexually harassed at some point in their career. Of course, once again, the situation is worse for women of color who are onlys, because they are often onlys on 2 dimensions, not only the only woman, but also the only person of color. And what's important is that the impact can be that they become exhausted and come to deeply doubt themselves. I have a story of a young woman named Isabel, who has just come to me as a coaching client, who is suffering from this. I mean, really suffering. When she came to me, she was just she was feeling lost and feeling very, very confused about whether or not she really had what it takes to be a leader, with maybe a little bit of reinforcement of imposter phenomenon, along with exacerbated by the dynamic of being an only, right? In her case, she had been the only woman on a senior leadership team in a large international organization. And when a vacancy opened up on the team, she advocated for the promotion of a woman from within the organization who she felt was very talented and quite ready for the job. And all of her male peers and her male boss wanted instead to hire a man from outside. She was really outraged by this because she felt that the talents of this woman were not being seen and not being recognized, and that she decided to really go to the mat on this one. She actually went over to her boss's boss, and convinced her boss's boss that this woman was talented and ready and should be the one promoted to the position. Her boss's boss agreed and went to her boss, told him he had to promote this other woman. And it probably won't come as a surprise that Isabel then, when it came time for her performance review, got a very negative review from her boss, who said that she discriminated against men and that she was not a team player. And of course, this went into her personnel file. She felt that this was an untenable position, and she left. But the impact on her was to have internalized this doubt about herself and to feel that she might never again want to be in a leadership position because of the experience of being an only in this case and how the toll it had taken on her. So I wanted to share the example of Isabel as an example of what can happen when these dynamics occur. So I want to share with you now the last topic for this presentation, which is the role that OD can play in creating more inclusive workplaces. As OD practitioners, I believe our role is to raise awareness about systemic forces, systemic dynamics, in this case, around gender. We can share current research on societal and industry statistics because that helps both women and men in organizations see the bigger picture that is impacting gender in their organization. We can share organizational statistics on gender difference. For example, in this large bank that I mentioned earlier that I worked in a short time back, we brought statistics out for them to look at, which showed that the women in the bank were clustered in parts of the bank, in departments and roles that were not places that people got promoted into senior leadership from. And that was one of the reasons why there were so few women in senior leadership. That wasn't visible. It wasn't seen. We pushed for those statistics to be revealed, and that opened up some important awareness. You can run focus groups. You can organize storytelling groups. There are ways to get systemic awareness up that I think OD practitioners can organize and facilitate or encourage organizations to do. Another one is to review policies, procedures, and practices. And I think this is part of raising systemic awareness. Very often, policies and procedures in organizations do not reflect practices. For example, on flex time. Many organizations these days have a policy allowing for flex time, but the practice is that people quickly learn that if they request flex time or take flex time, often their careers are derailed. So the policy is there, but the practice is not supported. There are other policies and procedures that may or may not be in place that would support more inclusive environments for women, like being able to work remotely, even after the pandemic, having more opportunities for part-time work, having childcare subsidies, affordable childcare, being more accessible, family-friendly work schedules, dealing with pay gaps, having living wages, paid family leave, and hiring promotion practices. These are all things that OD consultants can help the organizations look at and see if they're missing what they need to create, and if they have them, but their practices don't reflect them, what they need to change. They can also encourage the development of women's leadership programs. Now, most people think of women's leadership programs as programs, the purpose of which is to fix the women and teach the women to be more like men so that they can be leaders. But I'm not talking about that. I don't actually believe in that. What I'm talking about is women's leadership development programs that actually create the systemic awareness that I've been talking about here, help women see that there are forces that are impacting them, where the things that they think are only about them or only interpersonal dynamics are really systemic. So help them create that awareness, help create support among women, and create a shared vision for a culture that they would like to work together to change. As the way things work now, particularly if you think about the only dynamic with women scattered about the organizations, not often being the only woman in the room, it's kind of like a divide and conquer strategy. The impact is that women don't have a chance to band together and support each other and support change. And they need a shared vision for the culture they want to create together. That can come out of a women's leadership program, development program, the way I'm talking about it. OD practitioners can encourage the development of sponsorship programs for women. Lots of research showing that sponsorship makes a difference, has an impact, whereas mentorship doesn't. Encourage men to engage as allies, promote the creation of ERGs, employee resource groups, for women and people of color, for safety and support. These are all ways that OD practitioners, roles that OD can play in creating inclusive environments. There are many more possibilities, but this is a sample of a few. Last but not least, I'd like to tell you more now about how you can find out more about some of the things I've talked about by contacting me either at annlitwin@annlitwin.com by email or by going to my website, www.annlitwin.com. So that's it. I want to thank you very much and thank Mian for this opportunity.
On behalf of everyone, thank you, Anne, for that wonderful and beautiful explanation of the barriers and opportunities for women within organization. The part that is sitting with me is really about the new friendship rules among women and how unconscious such an important element of work-life etiquette can be between women. So thank you for bringing these important items forward and sharing with us with such grace and wisdom. I am grateful to you for taking time out to do that. And for the viewer, if you'd like to contact Anne to continue this conversation, her email along with her biography and also links to relevant resources are all in the description of this video. So Anne, a big thank you to you again for your time with us. Keep well, keep safe, everybody.